Reverend Jeffery Miller has been the pastor of St. Philip's Church for the past 4 years. I sit down exclusively with him for this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups. And if you haven't already, subscribe to my YouTube channel and download my free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. Reverend Jeffery Miller, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Obviously, we're sitting in one of the famous places in Charleston, St. Philip's Church. And I know that obviously you've been a pastor here for quite a while. What is it like to be Reverend Jeffery Miller these days?
Well, it's not been quite a while. It's been about 4 years. It may seem like quite a while,
Yes,
depending upon who you ask around here. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
It's an exciting place to be. Charleston is an exciting place to be, all of the growth that's taking place, and we've experienced a lot of that at St. Philip's as well. So it's a good place to be right now.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
What is the biggest difference between 4 years ago and right now when you think of you as a pastor?
Well, I think just the idea of getting to know the congregation better. I was somebody who was returning to Charleston after really 25 years away, and moving into a new congregation where I didn't know the people and they didn't know me. And so it was like the beginning of a relationship. There was a sense in which you're dating. But we've been married now for 4 years. And in one sense, the gloss has come off, but on the other hand, it's very exciting because we know each other better, and there's a sense of trust and really a sense of affection as well.
Affection as well. I want to go back to obviously last Sunday. You know, I don't want to talk about it, but I come by and drop off donations to the church every Sunday. And obviously you were here preaching.
Yes.
And the sermon was Born Again.
Right.
If you were to look back at your sermon from Sunday to right now, what is still the biggest difference in your mind about that sermon?
Well, that's a great text. It's one of the most famous texts. It's from the Gospel of John, the 3rd chapter. And it's the story of Jesus' encounter with a very affluent, intellectual, and gifted man, but a man who is searching.
Yeah.
And I think that is a great picture of 21st century America. We've got a lot of people we've got a very educated people in America today. We have a fine educational system. We have people who are among the most affluent people in the world, but we are a people who are desperately searching for something. And so Nicodemus, I've said, is the man for all seasons. This man that comes to Jesus under the cover of darkness is in many respects the representative man.
Yeah.
He lived a long time ago in the 1st century, but he really represents so many of the things that we admire and many of the things that we're searching for in the 21st century.
What is that particular scripture in regards to searching for things here in America?
Well, I think that, Nicodemus, what I pointed out in the sermons is that Nicodemus was a very educated man. He had a Greek name, and which was unusual among Jews. Most Jews had Hebrew or Aramaic names, but he'd been given a Greek name, probably because his parents came from the upper class, and they had been exposed to Greek culture, and he apparently preferred his Greek name. So he was very educated. He was very moral and upright. He was a Pharisee. The Pharisees were the most respected members of Jewish society in the 1st century. Very moral. They worked very hard to be obedient to the Old Testament and its moral precepts. And he was influential. John's Gospel said that he was a member of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish ruling council. He was a ruler of the Jews. So here's a man who's educated, he's moral, he's upright, he's powerful, he's influential. All of those are things that we 21st century Americans admire. And yet Nicodemus is coming to Jesus under the cover of darkness. And he's risking his rank, he's risking his reputation to consult with a man that his fellow Pharisees were jealous of and despised. Now that tells me that Nicodemus is searching for something. There's something missing in his life that he's not finding in all the things that the world and money can afford. And I think that is a picture of 21st century America today. We've got all the things that the world says should make us happy, content, complete, but we're not. We're still searching for something. And we think that we can find it if we just amass enough of the toys.
Yes, sir.
And it simply isn't true.
And I hate to be redundant, but what exactly is America missing these days in your mind?
I think more than anything else, what America is missing is a relationship with the living God. Now, that's not to say that Americans aren't spiritual, But I think somewhere along the line, Americans, and this is certainly true of my generation and perhaps my parents' generation, they had been inoculated with a weak form of Christianity. It was a cultural Christianity.
Okay.
And as a result, they become immune to the real thing. In other words, they grew up being churched and going through the motions and saying the formulas, but many of them never had an encounter, a living encounter with Jesus Christ. And as I like to say, Christianity is really not so much about religion. It's about the person of Jesus Christ, and therefore it's about a relationship with him.
Yes.
And so for many people, I think what is missing is that personal relationship. They think they know what Christianity is really all about, but they don't.
What is it?
Christianity, at its heart, is a relationship. And when I say it's a relationship,
yes, sir.
It's like it's possible for somebody to know a great deal about Jesus Christ, in the same way that I may know a great deal about the Queen of England. I may know who she's married to. I may know who her parents were. I may know what her favorite kind of dog is. I may know who her grandchildren are.
Right.
I know a great deal about her. But if somebody were to say, do you know Queen Elizabeth II? I would have to say, no, I don't know her. I think that there may be people out there in the world who think they know Jesus Christ, but what they really do is they know about him, but they've never had a personal relationship with him. And there is a profound difference between the two.
Sure. Yes, sir. Agreed. I absolutely agree. You talk about American and searching for answers. Everyone's searching for answers right now with the coronavirus virus, that is.
Right.
Obviously, and I'll say this too. I come to St. Philip's a lot for Holy Communion. Where are we right now with that as far as you as a leader here at St. Philip's?
Well, I think it's the answer has to come on a number of levels. First of all, I think that there is a great deal of anxiety out there about the coronavirus. And I think we need to be aware that there's anxiety. I think that the worst thing that the Christian church can do is panic. I'm a firm believer that God is sovereign, and I think he's sovereign over all of our lives.
Right.
I don't think God's going to call us home until we finish the work that he's given us to do. Our times are in his hands. He notes the fall of the sparrow from the sky. Right. He numbers the hairs on our head. So as a Christian, I can't really panic about this. Now, that's not to say that we don't take responsible action, that we don't do due diligence. Of course we do. I think, and I've got a theory about this, but I think as we push God out of Western culture, and that's what we've done, the millennial generation is the largest generation in this nation's history, larger than the baby boomers. But the vast majority of them have never been raised in a church. First generation in this nation's history, basically not to be raised in the church. And they are a generation of anxious people. They're worried, they're anxious. And I think as we push God out of the picture, the anxiety level rises because we've been taught to believe that this world is all there is. And if we don't believe that there's a God in control or in charge and that this life is all there is, then of course our anxiety level is going to go up. But the God that I know tells me to be anxious for nothing.
Right.
But by prayer and supplication to make my requests known to him. And the peace of God, which passes human understanding, will guard my heart and my mind. So I think there's a lot of anxiety out there. I think that we need to be concerned. But we've faced other illnesses. SARS, MERS, the avian flu, the swine flu, all of these things are out there. But we seem to be particularly anxious about this. So what are we doing at St. Philip's? Well, we are changing the way that we're doing Holy Communion somewhat. We're encouraging people not to dip the bread into the chalice. We're asking them, and that if they normally do that, to refrain from taking the chalice. We are continuing to serve communion for the time being, as we normally do, but we're asking people to make those necessary changes. If they're uncomfortable passing the peace in church or standing in the greeting line, we understand that as well. As things begin to develop, and as time goes by, we may have to make some other changes. But we're waiting to see. I think part of the problem with the coronavirus is that we just don't know all of the facts. This is a disease or an illness that has come over from the animal world to the human world. We don't have all the figures. So I think there's a lot of anxiety about it. And because it's spread so rapidly and it's gotten so much media coverage, it's hard to tell exactly what to do. So we are watching it. We're making changes. But we're trying not to do anything too soon or too late.
Too late. And let me get back here to St. Philip's Church and push aside coronavirus and all these other issues.
Right.
What's new? What's now here at St. Philip's Church?
Well, I think a number of things are new and a number of things are very exciting. We've got a great team of clergy, a great team of lay people. The congregation is growing. We've got more activities, certainly than we did 4 years ago. And we're seeing a lot of new growth. We're seeing a lot of visitors come in off the street that want to come into St. Philip's Church. I mean, it's an iconic building.
Yes, yes.
I mean, it's an impressive place. And what we're trying to do is show them Christian hospitality. We're really focusing on what you see in the book of Acts, chapter 2, which is one of the earliest descriptions of the church. It's after Pentecost. The church has grown exponentially. Right. Peter stood up on Pentecost, preached, 3,000 people were added to the number. So you've got a large church, it's a growing church. And what did they do? Well, the picture that you see in the book of Acts is that they devoted themselves to a number of things. To the apostles' teaching, right, which we would call the scripture today. I mean, the corpus of the New Testament is the work of the apostles. So we focused on preaching and teaching, trying to make that a high priority, to preach sermons that are biblically sound, but culturally relevant and personally relevant to somebody's life. So we focused on the apostles' teaching, the breaking of bread, which is shorthand, I think, for Holy Communion or worship. So we've really focused on worship here. We want to make this God-glorifying but exciting worship. The way I put it is like that scene in C.S. Lewis's The Chronicles of Narnia, where the children find this magical wardrobe and they push through the back of it into this exciting new land. I want them to step inside St. Philip's Church and find themselves coming into contact with the Lion of Judah, the real Aslan, Jesus Christ. So we focused on the teaching and the preaching, on the worship, on the breaking of bread, to the prayers. So we've got prayer teams, and we've got people who pray for St. Philip's Church and for its mission and for our congregation on a daily basis. And then finally, they focused on the apostles' teaching, breaking of bread, prayers, and to fellowship. Right. And that's one of the things we've tried to really incorporate into the life of this church, is the fellowship, so that people are, we may be different. We've got a lot of people who come from very different backgrounds. Some are native Charlestonians. We've got people who've been here for generations. Pinckneys, Middletons. Right. These families have been around for a very long time, but they're worshiping right alongside people who are brand new to Charleston. And I think that's what's so exciting about where we are right now. St. Philip's is a great mixture of people, and even though we come from different backgrounds, there are Northerners here as well as Southerners here. There are black people and white people. Sure. And what's exciting is that despite whatever differences we may come with, what unites us, that is this personal encounter with the living God. That's right. That is what unites us, and it's greater than all of our differences. Exactly. And I think that is characterizing, and more is beginning to characterize the life of St. Philip's.
And you talk about right now, let's talk about the future. What's that biblical scripture that you keep looking at right now to describe St. Philip's in the next 5 years?
Well, that's interesting. One of the passages that have always excited me is from the book of Acts. It's the 13th chapter. I always say that is the turning point in the history of the early church. That is the church in Antioch. It was the first place where the early believers were called Christians. Right. Up to that point, they've been called the followers of the way, because Jesus describes himself as the way, the truth, and the life. Right. But when they get to Antioch, they're called Christians. In other words, little Christ. For the first time, people look on them. The outside, unbelieving world looks on them and says, these people are little Christ. That's what we want St. Philip's to be. And it was to that church in Antioch that God the Holy Spirit spoke. And they set aside Paul and Barnabas and sent them off. And that was the beginning of Paul's great missionary journeys. Right. And it was that church that changed the world. And so when I look at St. Philip's, what I want us to be, and we're living in a global world. You know, I may have said this a few years ago when we interviewed first, right, that it is just as easy for me to drive to Maine as it is for me to fly to Dubai
Right.
or some other part of the world. And what's exciting about that is that means that we're not confined anymore. We live in a global world. And so I see St. Philip's and the message that it's proclaiming having the ability to reach the entire world with the good news. We're not confined specifically to Charleston. We want to do that. We want to reach our own Jerusalem, but also Judea and Samaria, and finally the uttermost parts of the earth. And that's that picture in Acts chapter 13 of that church that sent out those missionaries, no longer being reactive, but proactive, looking for places where the gospel is not yet reached and going there and sharing the good news of Jesus Christ, because it is good news.
Exactly right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well, Reverend Jeffery Miller, thank you so much for your time. And again, welcome back to Quintin's Close-Ups.
Quentin, it's a pleasure.
Likewise.
God bless you.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you.